Welcome to lesson number 9. In today's lesson, we are looking at functions, parameters, and external functions and how we can incorporate all of this into our code to make it easier for us and for others to understand. So let's begin. Let's make a new Python file and we shall call it lesson number 9 and we'll say functions. It's a bit strange that we didn't name these ones anything, but that's all right. Lesson 9 functions. And let's learn about functions. So essentially what a function is, it's a way that you can reuse code over and over whenever it is called upon. Now, if I was to call your name, I might say, and just because we used this name a lot in the last video, I might say John. So if I call John, and here he is down here from the last video, if I call John's name, well then John knows I'm talking to him and not somebody else. And normally when you call someone's name, you're going to ask them a question. Like you might say, hey John, how old are you? So I've called John's name, I've asked him a question, and normally John would respond with something like in the previous one, I think it was 17. So he said 17. So functions work very much the same. We can make a function that when we call upon it and ask it a question, it will then return a value, and we can sort of dictate what we want it to return based upon what we're sending it and what we want it to check. So we're going to start off by doing just some normal code here, and it's going to look a little bit like lesson 1, 2, 3. We're going to say name equals input, and we'll say what is your name, and then we're going to say age equals int input, and we'll say what is your age, question mark. We're going to ask the two, and then down here we're going to print name. Actually, we're going to do this a fancier way. We're going to print, and I'm going to write this F in front of my string there. I'm going to say you are, and now I can, because I put that F there, I can embed their name. You are name, and your age is age. Alright, so pretty standard code apart from this nice little fancy thing we did at the bottom. It's just a nice way that we can embed variables within. If you remove the F, you'll see it gets rid of that, so that's a nice way to embed it. So if I go run, what is your name? John, he's back and he's 17. There, so that's all good, that works well. But if I said to you, well, look, I'd actually like a function that we could use to check John's age. You might say, well, we're only entering one person here, so we don't need to do it. Well, if you remember back to our dictionary, here we entered in loads of different people's ages. And what we could do is we could use a function to check whether they had a real age or not, and to see if it's within a right range. So we're going to make a function now. Now, the way functions work is they have to always be above where you want to use them. So I want to use it here. And just as a placeholder, I'm going to write print. I'm going to say function goes here, or more function is called here. All right, so this is where I want to print, this is where I want to call my function. So here's where I want to call his name. So I want to say, hey, I want you to check something for me. And he can't be below us, but he can definitely be above us. So let's make that function now. So if I say def, which is just for define, and I give it a name. So just like I was calling John's name earlier, I'm going to give this a name. And I actually want to check a range value here. So I'm going to say range or age range check. And then I'm going to put 2 brackets after like so and my colon. And then I just need to enter a couple of times. For a function, you need to have at least 2 spaces after. If I just have 1, it can get upset with me. I need to have 2 spaces after. There we go. So I've got my age check here. Now, it's not doing anything yet. It is just blank. But down here is where I can call his name. So what I could say is, I could say age range check, like so. Now, I get an issue with name, but we'll come back to that in a minute. So I can say age range check. And what I might say here, just, we'll say past equals age range check. All right, so what I've done there is I've said whatever we're going to get back from here, we're going to save it to past, and then we're going to use that as a variable, so to speak. Remember I said we're going to ask a question. So let's go and actually fill out our function at the top here. So I want to ask it if the person's age is within the right range. Now I've called his name. So here I'm calling his name. So I've said pass is equal to, and here I'm saying, hey, age range check. But I haven't asked him a question yet, or I haven't sent him anything yet. I want to send him an age. So I'm going to type in here age. And you can imagine this is like a little portal. When we put a variable in here, it actually becomes what's called a parameter, and we can pass parameters to other places like functions. So I'm going to pass this up here, so age. So now I'm sending this age up to there. And I'm not sure why this keeps popping up with an error for me. If I try and run it, yeah, he's giving me an error because he doesn't like this. There's nothing in there yet, but that's fine. All right, so I'm sending up age. And within my function now, I'm going to say if age is less than 0, or age is greater than 120, we're going to return, and we need to return something. What should we return here? Well, we could return a Boolean value, we could return false, we could return whatever we want into past here. So why don't we return false? So that means they're wrong, their age range is wrong. And then we'll say else, if it's not in that range, we're going to return true. So return is them answering my question. So here I'm calling the name. Here I'm sending him a question of age. He's checking whether or not age fits in the right category we want it to. And then it's going to return a value there. Now, just to check this works, I'm going to say this. If past equals false. So if it's false, meaning they got it wrong, I'm going to print your age was incorrect. And then I'm going to say else. And I might actually do else. No, we'll go else. Else print correct age. And I'm going to leave this bit at the bottom just so I can see what the age was. So let's try this out. So I'm going to run this code. So what is your name? John. And John's feeling a bit sneaky today, and he says his age is 121. So you can see it now says your age was incorrect. And I'm going to try that again. So John, and he's not feeling sneaky today, 17, says correct age. So you can see this, and I'm just making some space here, this here called up our function to check the range. Now, why would we use functions? I mean, the argument is, couldn't I just put that right after here, or just down here, right? I could just check it here. And that's very true. You could do that, but that's only going to work in this one instance. If you have to enter loads and loads and loads and loads of ages and names and so on, well, it's easier to have this just there. And I mean, I guess to iterate that, why don't we do this? We're going to make a list. We're going to say list. We're going to call it score list equals, and we'll make it blank. Okay? And in our score list, what we want to do is we want to add, say, 10 values to our list. So because of that, I'm going to remove all of this here. And I'm actually going to remove this too, because now we're going to do a real example. And we're going to input into our score list, we'll say for I in range 10, we're going to say score list, we'll say value equals int input, and we'll say enter your score 1 to 10. All right, and so the user is going to input their score, and then we'll say value dot score list dot append, and we will say value. All right, so that's going to save their value to the list, and then at the bottom we will print score list. All right, and let's say we're looking for the average of the score list, so we're going to divide that by 10. So whatever the score is, we'll divide by 10. So if I run this now, score is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And, oh, I got an issue. Why did I get an issue? Well, firstly, I said scoreless divided by 10. It can't do that. So we have to do another for loop to get our score list out of there. Because remember, if I just print this, just so it makes sense, I'm just going to put this as 1 for now. If I just print that array and say 1, you can see it gives brackets around it and it's in the form of a list, so I can't just do that divided by 10. But I'll say for I in range len score list, so the length of our score list. And then I just say some value equals score list I. And what I could actually do here, a piece of fancy code. So in the past we've done this. Score list equals some value plus score list. Bit of fancy code is I can say plus equals. Nope, I can say equals plus. Is that the right way? He's not happy with that way. Is he going to say I should do it the other way around? Oops. Yeah, he's not happy with that way because he doesn't exist anywhere else. You know what? He was happy this way, so we'll go with that. Just want to see what that error is about. Reformat. Oh, he wants that. Okay, that'll do. So that should add some value, and it'll add to it this value here. I'm hoping that'll work. I'm just going to... Well, we'll see in a minute. So now I can print that divided by... let's just go divided by 5, and I'll make this 5. All right, so what this should do is pull every value out of our list. We did those earlier. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yep, there you go. And it said we got a 1. Something went wrong there. I think this is not working for me. I think what I need to do is have a sum value up here. Equals 0. And now I can do my plus equals. Yeah, there you go. Much better. Run. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yep, and the average is 3. Okay, so we've pulled every value out of our list up here. All right, so that works fine, but here's the issue. If I had a user that was entering a value and we had a 6 and a 3, and then I had someone who cheated and they went, oh, you know what, I'm going to put in a 12. Well, I wouldn't know that. That would save it to the list. And then let's say I had someone else who cheated and they entered 100, and then someone entered negative 100. And you can see it still worked, but I don't want all of those values. Now, I also don't want to write code over and over again. So I'm just going to use a function, because that will mean I can call the same code over and over. And maybe I have multiple scores that are going to be put in multiple locations. Well, then I can use that same code. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to make that function again. I'm just going to give myself some room. I'm going to say def check range, and then put a bracket. There we go. And before I save a value to a list, I'm going to send it to check range. So I'm going to say, after they put their value in, and I might say new value equals, and I will grab this checked range and put it there. And then I'm going to send into it value. Then if new value equals true, if new value equals true, which means the value is good, then I want it to save to my list. If it doesn't equal, then I'm going to say else print bad value. Okay. Now I need to obviously put that code in here. So we're going to say if value is less than 0 or greater than 10, or sorry, value is greater than 10, then I want you to return false. Else return true. Alright, let's see if that works. So when I run this one, oops, I pushed the wrong button. When I run this one again, let's say 1, 2, 100. and I got bad value. That's good. So that worked. And you can see it's asking me to enter another value now. So I can say 1 and 1. And I entered in a lot of 1, so it gave me back that. That's fine. So that worked. That stopped the bad values from going in. Now, you could argue, well, we missed out on a value then because we didn't get to enter our full 5. So if I said 10, 10, 100, then I've got another 10, 10. And it gave me a weird value here. I want to see why it gave me that value. Because I shouldn't have got an 8 if they were all 10. Oh no, because I divided by 5 and I only had 4 values that were put in. Yep, that makes sense. So to get around that, what I could do is just say divided by the length of the score list. So now that'll return the right one. 10, 10, 100, 10, 10. Yeah, there you go. That works much better. I was dividing by 5, so that's why we got the wrong value, but that's fine. All right, so you can see it checks the value there. Now, I know this isn't optimal yet because we miss a value, and we actually want it to go back up and do that value again. And we'll fix that in a minute. But there's one other thing I would like to do. Let's say the user does this. So they're good, and they go, 10, 6, 4, and then they go 5 and hit a T as well and enter. Well, you can see the whole thing now crashes because it doesn't like that. But I don't want it to crash at this point. I'd like it to say, hey, you entered something in wrong and it needs to be put in correct. Now, the reason it crashed there is because I promised the computer we're going to enter an integer. But instead of it just blanket crashing, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of that int like so. And I'm going to run it again, and you'll see now it'll be fine if I enter, 10. Well, it won't be fine if I enter 10, and why is that? Well, it says here, yeah, this here won't work. I've got the way around it. It's okay. So we're going to say def, so define, and we are going to go check type, and we're going to write value. And check type means we're going to check to see if it's actually an integer that they entered in. So we're going to say try. This is some nice new code for you. We're going to say try int x, and then return true. So we're going to try C, and we don't want actually x there, we want value. Try to see if that is an integer. If it's an integer, return true. If it's not an integer, then we're going to write this value error, and we're going to return false. And I'll go over what that means in a second. So here it's saying try out this code to see whether or not it's an integer. So here it crashed because it went, hey, we checked it and it ended up being a string, not an integer. And we can't run a string through that because how do we do maths on a string? It doesn't make sense. So here it's going to try do that. Now, if it doesn't crash, then it's going to return true and everything will be happy. If it does crash though, and we won't see it, then it's going to return false. So this is going to double check that the right value's been entered in the beginning. So what I can do here is say, hey, enter a value for me. And then I can say, now here I put value, but I might do check value equals check type value. There we go. Check type value. So it's going to start by checking my type, and then I'll say if check value equals true. So if it's good, then we're going to continue on with that. Actually, we'll start with if it equals false. That's better. Then we will print error on input. And if it's not bad and it's a good value, then we're going to tab and run that code there. Let's see if that works. So if I run that, enter a value E, it says error on input, and it asks me again. And I still get a crash at the end because it says, well, look, you're trying to divide by 0. You're not allowed to divide by 0. That doesn't exist, and it crashes. And it's obviously because nothing was entered. So let's see if we can fix this range issue here. So if I get this error here. I wonder if this will work. Let me just try I equals 0. I don't think that will reset that value, but let me try anyway. So they enter an E. No. So that we can't reset our value like that. But what we might do instead is we might enter, or we might do a while loop here to do this. So instead of a for loop, we're going to say while enter value equals false. Needs to be a capital F there. And we'll make a new variable just got at the top. We'll call it enter value equals false. And obviously it needs to be 2 equals because we're comparing. And need that at the end. So while enter value equals false, we're going to do this. And I actually don't like that because we wanted 5 values. We're going to say enter value equals 5. No, let's make it 0. 0. And we'll say, well, enter value is less than, get rid of that there at the end. Well, enter value is less than 6. Run this code. I like that. So every time they get it wrong, it's obviously going to loop around. Every time they actually store a value, we're going to say enter value plus equals 1. And you remember what that does? That's just going to add 1 to that every time. There we go. I know it's been a bit of a marathon, but let's see if that works. So if I run this one and I go 1, now why did that not work? Well, let me try it with an error first. E. Error. And okay, that's running forever. Fantastic. Now if I enter in an integer now, 1, why does it crash on me? It crashes at line number 24 first, which is down here. Alright, so it's crashing because even though it is an integer, and we can check it's an integer, well, it's wrapping it like it's a string. For example, if I go down here, well, 1, you can all see that's an integer. But 1, that's a string. Even though they look the same, it's wrapping 1. And we need to fix a way so that it doesn't wrap it like that. So what we're going to say, before it runs this, we're just going to tell it that value is an integer. There we go. So I'm forcing it to be an integer. If that doesn't work, then we're just going to make a new variable and we can force it to that. So 1. Nope, that didn't work. So let's say this. We're going to say value equals int value. All right, let's try that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And there we go. Let me put it in 6 times because I've said if it's greater than, it should be greater than 5. All right, so what do we do there? We just said, hey, whatever the value is, we're going to guarantee you that it's actually a value. And we could have done it here if we were a bit fancier in how we did it, because that actually does do that there for us. But because we didn't do it like that, we can do it here. So we just said, look, we're promising you that the value is integer. We've already checked it up here, so we know it is. So we're going to lock it in as a value. So if I run this one more time, you can see they enter a Y, and it says, hey, error on input, and they can enter a bunch of things and errors. But as soon as they enter a correct value, then it's going to go through. If they enter 100, and I don't think we did a check on this. We did. Okay, so all those bad values don't add up. Then I can enter good values, and it still exits nicely. All right, let me go from the top of the code down to the bottom, and I'm just going to go through each line and explain what it does. And then we finish this marathon of lesson. So from the top down, we set our list as score list. We made a blank list. We made 2 variables, sum and enter value. We made here 2 functions. We made a function called check range, and we parameter passed value. So down here, when the user input value, well, we sent, or we called this function up here. It was actually check type. We called that one first. Anyway, we called check type, and it was above it, so it worked, and we sent across value. Within our function, let's look at this one first. We said try this out first. So try, see if it is an integer. If it is an integer, then you can return true. If it's anything else that's not an integer, I want you to return false. This one here, it said, hey, if the value is in the right range, then return false. If it's if it's in the wrong range, return false. If it's in the right range, return true. Down here, we set a while loop. So while enter value is less than 5, run this code here. And we said, hey, enter a value between 1 and 10. And then we called our check type to make sure that the type was correct, which was this code here. If the type was correct, then it would move on to the else. If it was incorrect, it would go to the false and would return back error on input. And then the code would actually just go back around again up to here. If it was else, it would go down to here. Here's where we said, hey, that value that they put in, we've done a check on it. We're guaranteeing you that it is an integer. So we did that one. Then we said new value is equal to the range check. And that's when we checked our range check because we've guaranteed it's an integer. So now we can check the range. So now we're checking the range. We return back new value. If it's true, then we're going to save it to our list. And then we're going to add one to enter value, meaning, they've entered a correct one, we can add one. If the range is outside, then we're just going to say bad value and go back to the start without adding one. Now, some of you I know would say, hey, couldn't you put this all into one? Yes, you definitely could. It might make more sense to do that, but in this case, we did them separately. And then lastly, down here, we just went through the whole list. So for I in range score list, and we just added one to some value from each value on the list. So, whatever each index value was here, 0, 5, 9, 10, whatever. Probably not 0, that wouldn't have saved. We've added it in sum, and then we finished. We got that value of sum, and we divided it by however many values were in our list, and that returned back our average. Okay, that was a big video. Hopefully you learned something in that one. In our next video, we're looking at modules, and then we're almost finished. There's not many more to go in now. See you in the next video.